It records. There we go. Good evening. What a day. I was counting ballots over at the courthouse, which is enough to cross your eyes. And then got over here and my computer said, nope, sorry, nope, not going to do it. So I ran over. I don't know if the county knows that when I retire, I expect to keep a key, because I've got to be able to run into different departments like this. Anyway, the talk is going to be in two parts tonight. I'm going to tell you a little bit about how we became a National Historic Landmark District. Cindy will talk about what that means. So I will tell you that the National Historic Preservation Act was passed by Congress in October of 1966. It's a powerful little piece of legislation that can really help, I would say, mitigate the impact of federal projects on properties that have been designated to be important. So on November 13th of 1966, Secretary of Interior Stuart Udall announced designation of 57 National Historic Landmarks, which took the national total to 746. Number 8 was the Georgetown Silver Plume Historic District, Clear Creek County, Colorado. And the document noted that the site, quote, consisting of Georgetown, Silver Plume, and the Loop Gorge between them, probably the most scenic and historic of all Colorado mining districts. Both Georgetown and Silver Plume, which are active communities, boy, not much in 1960, anyway, which are active communities, contain many buildings erected in the 1860s and 1870s when the area was a major source of gold and silver. The famous aerial railroad that connected the two is gone, but the state, which owns much of the valley, including the railroad grade and a number of mine tunnels, is interested in developing the area as a state historical park. I'm going to get back to that in a little bit. So I said to myself, well, the act is passed in 1966. We're appointed in 1966, therefore we're first. Nuh-uh. There was an earlier act in 1935, the Historic Sites Act. And at that point in time, Congress turned to the fairly young Park Service and said, why don't you tell us what historic sites are out there, like across the whole country? If you've ever done cultural survey work in a town, you know how overwhelming that is. Now think of these guys. Tell us what's there, all of these states. So they get started in 1935, and then World War II comes along, puts a little crimp in the style. And then it gets started a little bit in the 50s, but really doesn't take off until the late 50s and the 1960s. And the Park Service, Department of Interior decide they're going to follow themes. One of the themes is the Transcontinental or Trans-Mississippi West. And then within that, a subgroup called prospectors, sodbusters, and ranchers, basically. And we fall within that. Obviously, we're part of the prospectors. And a gentleman named Merrill Mattis, who was a historian at the St. Louis Field Office of the Park Service, starts trotting around and going out to visit all these places in the Trans-Mississippi West and doing forms and writing up what he finds and taking some early pictures. Well, much to my surprise, I discovered that not only weren't we one of the first because of that 1935 act, we were actually the 13th in Colorado. So before us, how dare they, before us, Bent's Old Fort, Raton Pass, the Lindenmeyer site, Pike's Stockade, Pike's Peak, interesting that a mountain peak would be but anyway. Then the ones that sort of insulted me were those other historic districts that get designated in 1961. Central City Blackhawk, Durango Silverton, Leadville, Silverton, Telluride, Cripple Creek, and then the Lowry Ruin, and lo and behold, we come along at 13. But the other first 12 were all designated by 1961, and we weren't, which I don't think is nice at all. But part of that is referenced a little bit in what the Secretary of Interior's press release says in '66. Once the State Historical Society really starts to develop the Loop Valley and has plans for that railroad park, all of a sudden the whole thing takes shape. And you don't just have some nice historic buildings, you really have an entire district. And we are pleased to have that. And this designation has been extremely important for us. And I'm going to turn this over to you pretty quickly because I've talked a lot today. So here you go. Are you ready? Yes, you are. Anyway, it did indeed. I said it'd be no more than 10 minutes. I think I made 7. Here you go.
Oh.
Your turn.
Oh, I thought we were half and halfing.
It was a long day and I ran a lot to get the speed up. So I'm going high speed.
Okay, this is all.
Yes.
All
that's
of this
mine.
stuff?
You want me to get rid of it?
No.
Clicker?
No, I have my
You
clicker.
got your clicker?
Yes. This is not a trip down what happened in each and every year for 50 years. I hope actually, as people like Historic Georgetown also get to be 50 years old, they will at some point along be up here doing the stories of some of those, the events that have happened over the 50 years. What Christine asked me to do, and I'm happy to at least give it a shot, is explain a little bit about what difference does it make if you get nominated and put on the list as a National Historic Landmark District. I mean, does it actually make any difference to a town? What is the impact of such a designation? And I find that when people ask about it, lots of folks have the sense that it has a whole ton of impact on daily life. It actually has very little to none, but it does impact some things quite distinctly. I also has told our wonderful National Park Service representative in this room that that I was going to try to be as accurate as I could with all of this. So I hope, Greg, you bear with me a little bit. All right. Shoot it at the machine. Okay? Well, I'm shooting it at the machine. Tell the machine to go to the next slide.
Shoot the machine. Let me take it. If you don't work, I'm throwing this at you.
You better throw it.
Can you make it work?
Yeah.
Enter, please.
It did earlier, though, didn't it?
Just have a seat. Okay, should we want to put any of those lights down? Okay.
No. No.
Sing for us, Cindy.
Yeah, right. I've also had an interesting day. Chris?
Hi, Cindy. Remember what I said about you? There's another projector over at the county. Really? Projectors? Sure. But I wonder if it has.
Where's that AV geek when you
Where's
need
that
it?
AV guy?
That's you.
You see, unfortunately, my notes are also on those slides, which, which makes this an interesting kind of situation to be in. We think it's coming?
Well, there's an orange light on it.
Yeah, I see the orange light.
There, beep beep. Okay, lights off quick. Coming soon. Epsom, a vision near you. Okay.
Okay. An NHL is a designated unit under the National Park Service. It's projected as a trapezoid, which is what we are, and the color tone is unusual.
Oh, it's not quite as good as the time that we had to all crowd around the computer to do a video show. LX.
Okay. So the National Park Service has the National Register of Historic Places. I think that at this point there are about 90,000 places listed in the United States on that National Register. Then it also has the National Historic Landmarks Program. Now, all the landmarks are also listed on the National Register, but the landmarks are distinct because those are the sites that are accredited in having exceptional value, historic value to the history of the nation. There are 2,500 landmarks nationwide. That's a whole different category than the 90,000. So it has a special emphasis on the word landmark. We are one of those 2,500 and one of the 25 in the state of Colorado. Now, Chris read off a number of the other districts. Most of the landmarks in Colorado, most of those 25 are sites. Chautauqua is one. They aren't districts. The districts are pretty much limited to the 6 districts that she spoke of. This particular district has extensive boundaries because, well, it was actually sort of fortunate. When they made us a landmark district, there were no boundaries.
All of the early ones didn't have boundaries.
What?
All the early ones didn't have
No,
boundaries.
none of the early ones had boundaries.
They were there.
And so they decided in about 1978 that it was time to define where the edges of these landmark districts are, and you will certainly see why in a minute. And a man by the name of Joseph Mendinghall headed west to do exactly that. And when he arrived in the Georgetown Silver Plume National Historic Landmark District, HGI, Historic Georgetown, was already up and running. And a voice many of us were familiar with as the voice of preservation of this town, Ron Neely, was running HGI. And Mr. Mendinghall found Mr. Neely. And Mr. Neely was, if he was known for nothing else, was known for his grandiose visions. So it was very nice that Mendinghall happened to run into him, because his concepts of the district, of course, ran straight up the hillsides till you hit the national forest. And you can't have actually, he would have loved it to go to the ridge lines, but you can't overlap a national forest. So the current boundaries of the district reflect that conversation. The district includes the entirety of the town of Georgetown, the whole Loup Valley, the entirety of the town of Silver Plume, but it runs up to the national forest boundaries all through that area. So it is not only our towns and the structures in them, it is the resources on the mountainsides. This also is important because one of the basis of the district is that we're a mining district, and the mines aren't exactly on 6th Street. So the idea that you include some of your mountainsides, you're including your mined landscape. And what does that actually do? Well, under the Preservation Act, the landmarks receive special attention for the impact of federally connected projects on the landmark district. Federally connected basically means the feds have money in it, the feds have permitted it, there has to be some sort of a permission or license from the Fed to do the project. If one of those conditions exists, then the folks have to go through what's called a Section 106 process. Actually, the law's been amended, and so the actual section number isn't 106 anymore, but we still call it a Section 106 process. What that basically means is that whatever the group is, and the group could be a state government, it could be a private corporation, it could even be the town, or a person. If you, a person out on a mining claim, if you require federal money or are using federal money, using a federal permit, you must go through this process. And the steps of the process first are you have to look at the area that you're doing your project in and say what historic resources are there. You have to do an inventory, or you have to have an inventory done by a qualified person. And then you have to say, okay, how's the project going to impact this historic resource? I mean, is it going to change what it looks like? Is it going to take it down? Is it, how's it going to impact it? And if there are impacts, you have to demonstrate that what you've done is try to avoid them or minimize your impact. And you have to demonstrate that you've done that. And then if you can't avoid it, then you have to do some form of mitigation. It does not stop a project. It just provides for a mitigation. But given the avoid and minimize, it can change projects quite a lot, as we will see. State folks, local folks, private governments, local governments, private folks are not required to do this unless you happen to be federally connected somehow. Most state agencies do it because most state agencies have federal money in them someplace, and so they end up using the process. The state is required by that act to set up the State Historic Preservation Office, and those are the people who negotiate the 106 process with the federally connected folks. And you notice what that sort of does? It means that actually, if somebody has that federal connection, for instance, CDOT and the I-70, they could negotiate with the state and sort of look who's left out. At that level, that decisions could be made that really impact the town of Georgetown and the citizens here, and we could just never hear about them until they were on top of us. We'll talk a little bit later about how we sort of try to cure that. Okay, Chris, you want to go on to that?
Don't know.
Okay, the towns, the counties, private parties are not required to do anything if you don't have federal connection. What has happened in Georgetown in these 50 years is because the town has chosen to do it. It has not been mandated by the landmark district. This is a huge confusion because the town enacted zoning. The town enacted a design review. The town bought a mountain. Thank you, Michael. Up on the Leavenworth Mountain. They developed a preservation plan. Number 4, the town also chose to become a certified local government because what the town recognized was these federal connected projects could be settled before the town ever knew anything about it. So if the town went and became a certified local government, and you have to have established some sort of recognition of your historic structures in order to be a certified local government, but that meant the minute you're a certified local government, it means that you get a seat at the table for all the federally connected projects, which is a really, really important seat at the table in all kinds of connections, which we will see. More recently, the town has passed 1041 regulations based on historic preservation, passed a demolition by neglect ordinance, and the town does restore and maintain its own structures. The town has chosen, but again, not been required to, in Silver Plume. Again, they did the zoning, the design review. They own, and their significant structures are mainly town-owned in Silver Plume, and they've passed 1041 regulations. Rick Caldwell did an incredible job in Silver Plume of going through all of the regulations to get the town of Silver Plume regulations very much in sync with this process. An incredible job. Private parties in this town own and they maintain and they restore and they rehabilitate and they adaptively reuse structures all the time. And they participate in identification, Lots of you folks have little plaques by your doors saying, my house was constructed about this date. They also have formed nonprofit organizations, plural, many of them, to promote our preservation. And more than anything else, This place is incredible in its volunteers who care. Basically, that's where the heart of this story lies. You want to go to the next one? But let's talk about federally connected undertakings. You know these poles? You know, as you're going down Argentine Street? This is in 1968. The first Section 106 hearing in the state of Colorado. We were first at a lot of things. Came out of the town of Georgetown. Public Service Company wished to bring power to the Henderson mine, and the initial idea was that you put up that's a really high power line going to Henderson to
15,000 volts.
115,000 volts. That's not small, right, Nick? But so initially it was planned to go on what you would look at as typical high power lines, you know, those things that go up over the mountains. But this line has to come right through 7th Street, go right down Argentine, across the highway, and goes down along the far side of the highway. And the town realized this happened and said, now wait a minute. If we're a new landmark district, we were about 2 years old at that time, if we're a new landmark district, you shouldn't be able to do that. Shirley may remember this. There was a Charlie Beagle, and he was out in the street saying, I prefer trees, with his protest sign going on this. But what happened was the very young State Historic Preservation Office stepped into this whole discussion. Now, the power has to go to Henderson. That's not the question. The question is, what do the power poles look like? So instead of the great aluminum poles, they're not aluminum, but the great metallic poles up in the sky, the solution, because we were a landmark district, the solution was the brown poles we see now. And after you know they're there, you're very conscious of them, but it is the kind of thing that a landmark district makes the difference, makes the huge difference. So let's go to the next one. Now, the town then gets into downtown improvements. And a piece of the downtown improvements is paid for through a HUD grant. It was a HUD grant. I'm looking at Mike because we have Mike to thank for downtown improvements. During his 3 terms as mayor, and Nick was on the board.
You were.
What?
You were.
And I was, but you know, Bob Hall. It was a group of folks, and yes, we were using federal money. So what happened here is all of these plans were actually submitted to the State Historic Preservation Office, and they got to comment on what we were doing with sidewalks and what we were doing with lighting, which is a replication of the original lighting. Actually, they made no significant changes in our plans because we had adhered quite closely to what the original street looked like. But that is another case. That's a town level case. Can we go to the next one? And then a flood came along, and it was FEMA determined they were going to redo the cribbing in Georgetown. Cribbing is quite frequently put into creeks as concrete walls. That was the original plan. How different, I mean, we don't even think about this, but how different the town would look if our creeks were lined with concrete instead of lined with log cribbing. This is all new log cribbing. New, what is it, 30 years, maybe 25 years? New, but new since the landmark district. Again, this is FEMA, the flood, and they came to the town with their original plans, and once again, we were not yet a certified government, but we managed to get our noses in the door most of the time, and once again, it was a negotiation of saying, this is a landmark district. You got to put log cribbing back where there was log cribbing. The trick about that was you got to put log cribbing back where there was log cribbing. Where people had already concreted it, you had to allow concrete to go back. Some things make no sense. You know, you would think you could use the opportunity to, but that's not always the way it works. But this corner particularly, I mean, we all, you know where that is. You're going down Argentine Street where those creeks come together. And again, if you try to visualize, all right, if you made that whole thing concrete, the different sensation it would be in this town. So, and in 1989, thank you, Frank Young, the Bureau of Land Management decided that it was going to dispose of, I loved it because you don't dispose of land, but transfer land basically to Clear Creek County. And because we were the landmark district, and there you can see the outline, the black line is see how big this district is? But they were going to transfer all the BLM lands towards the county, primarily because the lands are in such small parcels, it's hard to manage them. Because we were a landmark district, it helped empower the local jurisdictions to say, we have reason to want these lands as the context to our district. We have reason to not want people to be just potentially building up the size of these. I don't know if you can read, the purple is Silver Plumes, the blue is the State Historical Society's History Colorado's, the yellow is the town of Georgetown, the orangey is the Division of Wildlife, the red is the Clear Creek County. The green are mining claims that have been acquired by historic Georgetown. This land transfer required an act of Congress, and thank goodness we did it in 1992 instead of 2016. It required an act of Congress, literally. The Land Transfer Act of 1993. Frank, am I on right?
Yeah, it finally passed in 93.
Yeah, it finally passed in 93, and said that all of these agencies, we had requested these lands as a patent from BLM for recreation and public purpose, and it said that yes, they would do that, provided that we all got together to plan recreation on those lands. And so that's where historic district public lands came from. It would have been very difficult for the individual jurisdictions to do that without that black line that surrounded them. We were able to tack on Saxon Mountain as a backdrop to the district because the district existed. So HDPLC has been putting along ever since. Met again last week, plans trails, takes care of trails, plans low impact recreation. The idea is to really care for the backdrop of a landmark district. Then even the visitor center had to go through the 106 process. The visitor center was partially funded through a grant that came through the state of Colorado, the Colorado Department of Transportation, but it was a federal pass-through called an enhancement grant. And so yes, all the forms got filled out and it was taken to be approved by the State Historic Preservation Office.
Cindy, you took that picture. How do you get a picture of that place with no cars in front?
I took that picture about 3 days ago.
There's no cars.
I know, I waited. Then another one that was, and certainly Cora Lou and a lot of other folks in this room remember how long and how diligent and how the town stepped forth on the redoing of the Guanella Pass Road. This was done by the Federal Highway Administration, Central Lands, essentially at the request of Clear Creek County, because the road was in very, very desperate shape, and they wanted the road so it would drain. You know, I mean, when you're getting sediment in the creek, it had grave problems. The original plan for the road, however, came in at a standard 2-lane with standard shoulders with it was at that point a collector road. I'm going to lose my designations here, but it had a particular designation and a particular vehicle length for its design. When we looked at the plans, if those plans had gone forward, Leavenworth Mountain would have need to be completely reshaped because the road was wider, the radiuses of the turns were wider, so none of the existing switchbacks would have worked. You would have had to have literally taken apart the mountain in order to get up the mountain. It also would give you a far more open look to the whole highway. So the Federal Highways came with 5 alternatives, all of them being very major changes to that road. And the local community actively protested. And I'm smiling at Corlew. Corlew collected 3,500 signatures. Now that's an interesting thing to do out of a town of 1,100 people counting dogs. You couldn't go into nice Lynn Anderson without getting, here's our petition, you can sign up right now and right here. We understand the road needs to be improved, but we want something that fits a little better to our landmark district. And because it was this district, eventually we were able to really get into the conversation, and there was an agreement made through the State Historic Preservation Office about changing the classification of the road, changing the design length, so you could leave the switchbacks on our mountain intact. Also, the rock walls were a part of that agreement. The wood guardrail is a part of that agreement. The width of the road is a part of that agreement. The lack of striping is actually a part of that agreement. And I'm not sure anybody follows through with that, but it says that each year that there will be a monitoring, and I'm not sure it was a state level monitoring that anybody actually does it, to make sure that all of these things continue to get carried out. But I think that when we drive, the Guanella Pass Road's beautiful. And it's truly beautiful, and it still feels like the country road. But it was a major effort on the part of the town of Georgetown. Corlew, yes, but Janet Klaus as mayor, going around to the other communities to get support. It was heavily a Georgetown community, but the landmark district was the handle. Most recently, can you see fences? Of course you can see fences. And when it snows, it's really cool up there. It looks like Cristo has come to town because all the snow, well, it does. The snow's all in these little holes and all of these fences on the mountains. But rockfall mitigation more and more is being colored to fit with mountains. But when they first started this one, it was a very novel idea that you were going to color your fences and that you were going to color your netting chains to try to blend in with the mountain. The one on the left, I think, is quite successful. The one on the right, a little less so. And but there is a whole little video called, what's Tony's video? That CDOT put together because they have actually won some form of award on their attempt, again, because this was a landmark district.
It was called Force of Nature.
It was Force, oh, I should know that, shouldn't I, Robert? We listen to it over and over and over again sometimes. If you want to see Force of Nature, just go down to the Visitor Center and ask Robert to put it on that TV, and he'll be happy to show it to
But
you.
imagine all of those as just plain chain link fence. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a huge difference to that mountain.
Yes, and there is a rockfall mitigation agreement with the town of Georgetown based on Section 106. And in a sense, the town has to be constantly sort of the watchdog on all of this, which we don't have an enormous town staff. Hi, Tom. Yeah, but so being watchdog is not something that you have a ton of time for, but this agreement is well known actually through the entire corridor and is a major one. Okay. Gateway improvements, and you see I was going to cut that picture off because that's the shadow of me taking the picture. Gateway improvements that were an enhancement grant through the Department of Transportation, and again, you know, the choice of lights, all of those kinds of things goes through a process, and it may sound laborious, and all paperwork processes are laborious in a sense, but it has also helped fund these things. We would not be as successful getting enhancement grants without having a landmark district to say, we are attempting to enhance a landmark district. It makes a substantial difference. The roundabout also, again, it being a federal, a state operation, that was essentially a gift to the town of Georgetown from CDOT, which is sort of amazing. I don't think of them as out giving $1 million gifts, but that one happened to be. Again, went through all of that paperwork approval. And when everything's going beautifully, the paperwork is very irritating. When everything is not going so well, you are very delighted to have all those steps to go through to say, you know, can we do it a little bit more this way? So that's, oh, and then our friend. Do you remember what this looked like? Hi, AT&T, because we're a certified local government, they have to even tell us. Do you remember what was there before this? Does everybody remember that? It was a pole that was actually this tall, but it was a lattice pole. It actually was 5 feet taller than this one. This one's 5 feet less. But it was sort of a lattice work thing, and it was a dark black or brown. AT&T has what they call a national agreement because it changes poles all the time. So it has a national 106 agreement that it doesn't have to go through that process as long as all it's doing is replacing a pole in kind. So it happily tells the town of Georgetown, yes, we're going to change the pole. And it's shorter than the other one. So, you know, it fits under our agreement, and we'll just change the pole. Well, then we watch the pole go up. And the pole is this bright white thing that is not a lattice at all. It's a solid white thing in back of the courthouse. And we go, wait, time out. Weren't you supposed to go through some sort of a process to discuss this? They said, no, it's shorter. And we said, yeah, but the other part of it is, it doesn't make a visual impact difference. And of course their sense was, didn't at all. And our sense was, yeah, it did. And at least if you would go to the Forest Service Brown, strangely enough, the Forest Service Brown blends in much, much better than a stark white. So they said, yeah, that's nice, but you missed your chance, and no. So we appealed to the State Historic Preservation Office. As a matter of fact, we sort of sent an email off to the President's Advisory Council on Historic Preservation in Washington. I hate to admit we do those things, but every once in a while we do those things.
Do they know you by name, Cindy?
Only the lady that I know by name, yes.
And you know that AT&T denies that this is their tower.
Oh, well, it's the county's tower now.
No, but I work across the street from that tower, and my phone went down, and they told me point blank on the phone, the nearest tower to me was on the top of Saxon.
Saxon Mountain, yes,
The
well.
nearest AT&T tower was on the top of Saxon. They say, no, we have no record of that tower.
We have no record of it.
That's what AT&T
Well, it was an interesting procedure because the State Historic Preservation Office basically agreed with us that somebody had taken certain liberties with their national agreement and pushed it a little bit far. And at some point, our town administrators sort of reached around the local guys and indicated a little higher up in AT&T that we were prepared to challenge that. And by that time they had a bid of whatever it was to paint the pole, and all of a sudden it became, yes, we'll paint it. And what I believe happened is that the person that yes, we'll paint it, and please don't ever contact that person again. No, literally, isn't that what the email said? Yes, that's literally what the email said. And so we said, well, yeah, my guess of what had happened is the person higher up said, how much will it cost to paint this? And I've forgotten what the cost is, but it may have been around $12,000. And they ended up saying, you think we want to bring ourselves to the attention of the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation on a challenge on our for $12,000? You know, paint the pole. And it, I think, did make a difference. So, so those are the kinds of things that the Landmark District helps us to be able to do. But the other thing that becomes really, really obvious is that you have to be watching. You have to be in it all of the time, and that's not always an easy thing to do. But over the 50 years, I think that we've learned a bit of how to be a participant in a really an important process that helps protect and enhance a place we care about a lot. So it is a constant challenge, though. You know where our next one is. That cut and fill. If that highway had been built after NEPA legislation, that fill slope would not look that way. It just would not look that way. And CDOT's going to be coming along and wanting to make changes in the road. They're going to be wanting to do, we at least know they want to do climbing lanes and descending lanes. And I think that the town and Silver Plume and the state of Colorado all together, the Landmark District folks, have an opportunity to have a huge voice and say, look, fix it. Let's talk about making it look like something else in our Landmark District. It is a constant challenge. It takes a constancy of effort, and a lot of people sitting in this room have made that effort. Okay, so when we get to next one, what are the opportunities that we get out of this? Well, the Georgetown Loop Railroad was created. It was started really in the 70s with the CBs. It was started before that as they collected the properties, but the construction started there. The High Bridge was dedicated in '84. I mean, it's a backbone economically to our town. And the district helped that happen. They helped the district happen, but the district helped that happen. The other thing is that individual contributing elements to an NHL have the same benefits as the National Register site. It makes you eligible for funding from a number of sources who will only fund designated historic sites. Look at those numbers. After the State Historic Fund was founded in 1992, this district, just this district, has received 84 grants to the tune of $5,619,736. And all of that has to be matched. So you have the match money, and that doesn't even begin to deal with the other kinds of grants from other kinds of entities and agencies. That's more per capita than any place in Colorado for State Historic Fund grant. It's not more in total money. Certainly Denver City Council, City and County of Denver has the biggest dollar volume. But per capita, we have done incredibly well on the use of the State Historic Fund. And the agencies that have successfully sought these funds, Colonial Danes, you know, theirs is the first. They've owned that hotel since 1954, before there was even a district. HCI, Georgetown Trust. I don't have the proper name. It's not the Friends of Grace Hall, is it?
No.
But what is its name?
Grace Episcopal Church Foundation.
The Grace Episcopal Church Foundation of Georgetown has. The Presbyterian Church has used those funds. The Georgetown Community Center. People for Silver Plume, plus both the towns for one function or another function, and the library district for the Tomei Library. So that's a big plus to us. The other is that contributing structures on a private level are eligible for state and federal tax preservation credits, which is a process that you have to go through. But if you are doing things to preserve your structure, and several people have used this, we'll have a couple of examples. If 20% of the amount, not only in what you have spent on maybe the outside preservation, but what you have spent on the project, which includes everything that is non-removable, including your kitchen cabinets and new sink, if that's what's happened on the inside. If it's commercial, it may become a 20% federal credit. It's not a deduction, it's a credit. Credits are nice things. And 20% of that amount may become, whether it's commercial or residential, a credit for the state taxes. So that's a real advantage that is not frequently used, and probably more frequently could be used. So let's take a look at some of those things. Only the listed sites qualify for states. So, all right, so how do you qualify as a contributing structure? That also has a definition for the National Park Service. They say you have to have integrity. We all have integrity. You know, I mean, what's have to have integrity? But their form of integrity is location, design, setting, materials, workmanship, feeling, and association. You don't have to have all those qualities, but you have to be judged by professionals in the field to retain enough of that to convey a sense of your historic significance. So we had a ton of surveys over the years, pieces of surveys here and there, and Christine got the really bright idea a couple of years back that it was time to make some sense out of the mess. Yeah, right. And so we entered, and she, thank goodness, it took the leadership of this. Let's get all those surveys together. Let's find out everything we haven't surveyed. Let's try to make sense out of the mess. It took almost 2 years because you have to survey you have to reassess everything you've got. You have to look at everything you have not looked at. including all the new buildings. I mean, yeah, the whole north end of Georgetown has to also get into this survey. Silver Plume had never been done completely. So you have to do that. You have to do the mining sites, what's along the 730 road up in Silver Plume. So that was completed by, Carl McWilliams is a professional architectural historian. He did the structures. Eric Twitty is a mining expert, and he did the mined land surveys. And the result of that says that there's over 400 contributing structures and sites in this landmark district. And I have a list around here somewhere.
Cindy, one of the reasons that Christine was saying let's do this was also talking to then County Administrator Tom Breslin and saying, you know what, we know I-70's coming through, and the more we have, the more ammunition we have, the more people will listen. So that especially for Silver Plume, where the impact is as local as you can get, as direct as you can get. We've quietly been doing the same, working with Lawson and Duma, taking a look at Idaho Springs. I mean, you're not going to stop the road, but if you can at least make them think about it as they go through, especially in the landmark district, the more information we have, the better off we are.
And the result looks very skinny. That's because inside the result there is a disc that is very fat. There's one of these in the library. This one says property of the town of Georgetown, do not remove. So I will remove it back there on Monday. But it's, there is in here a listing of all of those contributing structures. The disc has all of the forms that might have been filled out on anything ever, plus the new ones that indicate this work. So this is a real compilation of what this district is about, and will be helpful to individuals should they want to use tax credits, to groups should they want to apply for funding, and even individuals should they want to apply for funding. And it's a huge tool for the federally connected project. So let's look at a couple of these. I'm not doing the obvious ones. Obviously, the State Historic Fund projects would include, certainly most recently, the old school. They're tired of seeing us down there about that. And Hamel House, but some of the less known ones, the schoolhouse in Silver Plume Town Hall, which was lifted and put steel in it so it holds together. I find the paint job interesting, but that's yeah. And then by some magic, we got the State Historic Fund to consider buying a church for a community, but it's sort of a community kind of church, so it's not exactly a denominational thing. And then this building, private owners can at times also make use of the State Historic Fund if they wish to be in partnership with their local nonprofit. This building was, well, it was in worse shape than the large town hall in Silver Plume. It's called the Blanton Building. It was not about to fall over, but it was just not very safe. And again, it now has a steel H in the front of it. The front facade is on a conservation easement to People for Silver Plume, so that People for Silver Plume control the front facade of this building in exchange for the fact that the owner receives State Historic Fund grants to secure the building. So that's then the Loop Valley again. And this is sort of an interesting one. The state applies to itself, and they do. They go through the whole application process. They go through the whole review process for various grants. The large grant for the railroad bridge was $1 million from the Betcher Foundation, but it was in part because the state had invested in the rest of it. it was also in part, where's the next one? Because the town, not using state funds, using local funds, and the town and HGI purchased approximately half of Leavenworth Mountain, creating the backdrop of our community. I think most of you know the Leavenworth story, that there were a large number, matter of fact close to 100 condominiums planned on that mountain. The number went down to about 50. The town still sort of said no because it was the backdrop to the historic area, and the town and HGI, again, thank you, Mike Moore, purchased this. It impacted the Loop in a little-known story as this debate was roaring in town about what you do with this, and we actually ended up in Supreme Court a couple of times. This whole thing started about 1972. The purchase went on in 1981, so we were 9 years in this whole discussion of this mountain. The purchase started in 81. The plans for the High Bridge were getting done in 80. The little-known piece of this is that the Betcher Foundation called HGI and said, are you going to be able to secure that mountain? Because we're considering a $1 million grant for that High Bridge. And quite honestly, if we're coming right next to a whole mountain full of condominiums, we don't want to go there. So the little-known part of that story is that this town's willingness, and lots of people sitting in this room, I can look at Bob and any number of other people, literally, you know, they put their dollars on the line to help make this happen. But it did also make the other thing happen. Around Georgetown, the Grace Episcopal Church Foundation took over a building that was covered with stucco and used State Historic Fund grants to bring back Snetzers. Presbyterian Church, the State Historic Fund helps historic churches as long as it's not restoring religious objects. So if you need a roof, and that's an exterior thing to a historic building, you can talk to them. If you want to redo stained glass windows that have religious symbolism, they will tell you they can't do it. But they can help with the roof. So that was the grant on that one. Most of you remember what the Mahaney looked like? Bob? The burned out building? And how many years did we walk by it as the burned out building? So a combination of State Historic Fund, of HUD funding, a combination of funding, again made possible because you could point to it as a historic structure. And this house on Rose Street received a State Historic Fund grant in exchange for a facade easement that is now held by HGI. But it not only it was a historic fund grant, not a tax credit. And publicly, what we've done with the State Historic Fund. The State Historic Fund is the one who redid the fence along the park and redid the sidewalk right back there. It was a Town of Georgetown request to the State Historic Fund, but it is what made it possible to put flagstone back and not a concrete sidewalk. I mean, it's just the expense of doing a flagstone is what, 3-4 times what concrete would be. The Alpine Hose, the whole restoration of the Fire Museum, or the creation of the Fire Museum, in addition to work on the building itself, is State Historic Funds through the Town of Georgetown. Tax credits. Do you remember that the Tau Square burned? Had that fire in the back of Tau Square? And was pretty burned out? Well, this was a real interesting kind of arrangement that then happened because the owner was able, because they were rehabilitating and restoring the thing, to use all of whatever they put into it. That's an interesting thought. You know, you're putting your insurance money back into it, and you're getting a 20% federal and a 20% state tax credit, which means it's not as hard to consider the adaptive, you know, to bringing it back to what it looked like rather than tearing it down and making it look like something else. Individual residences, there are 4 of them that I know of in Georgetown. This is one of them, who have applied for a state tax credit for work they have done in their buildings. Stan Moore on Tower Street, the McClellan House, did a state tax credit. He said, please tell people that if they want to know how to do it, it's a lot of paperwork and it's a lot of hoops and it's worth a lot of money. And he did it, and he'd be happy to help anybody else through the process who is interested in talking about the process. Jim Blugerman has also expressed the same thing and used that kind of tax credit on his house. Okay. So here we are, guys. That's our landmark district. And it really survives because all of you are willing to put in time and energy. This is the most volunteer place I can ever imagine. Yes, Jan Sherlaw, volunteer number 1, and Pauline Marshall, who created it, People for Silverplume in 1974. You know, I can go around the room here. It's wonderful to have the federal tool, but it would be worth absolutely nothing without the people who live here, who have given their time, their energy, the expertise we have from Chris, from Long and Haft, from Kathy, from the people who, and yeah, we had our own Don Quixote for 35 years in Ron Neely. We really did. But it's all of the voices. And it's been 50 years, it's been quite a journey, and thank you.
One thing I wanted to add to that, Cindy was talking about the fact that you have to be vigilant, the local entities have to be vigilant, and if you don't believe that, have you been to Black Hawk recently? Black Hawk is part of a National Historic Landmark District. So the difference becomes what the town puts in place in terms of its design regulations and zoning. And watching this and watching that, and boy, that interstate. Anyway, but it doesn't fall into place. It takes a lot of watching and homework.
Could I say something that you didn't have? We've had a dream to reconnect the downtown to the entrance off of I-70, and Cindy was very helpful to me, and we secured $500,000 to move the 11th to Loop Drive back, to essentially take back part of our right-of-way and continue the street lights and sidewalks almost to 2nd Street. So there's more to do on it, but we just received a letter of award for $500,000. It's probably what, 800,000 process?
Yeah.
So she's not patting herself in the back, but she should.